So Bobby Clarke has given an amazing podcast with hindsight on the 2017 draft and what it was like to have Ron Hextall as his general manager at the Philadelphia Flyers and all the things that Hexy got wrong. Whew. And it was a tell-all story. I'm going to not only break down what he said, but I'm going to give you a brief insight into what it's likely like to be in one of these rooms with scouts, general managers, and what's going on. Hey, welcome to the Worst Sports Channel on YouTube, Hockey Sports with me, Coach Ryan D. Look, Coach Ryan D, I got a background in business. I got a bunch of fancy things you hang on the wall that certified me for that, degrees. I work in a big company. I've done leadership conventions. I get this. I've been in hockey. I can probably discern between the lines what's going on between Clarke and Hextall in this podcast. So I'll link it down below so you can see the article and read it if you want. And within the article is also the podcast. So you can go ahead and listen to that if you prefer the audio version of hearing Mr. Clarke speak. Look, organizations like hockey teams are just the same as businesses. They're living, breathing things with people at the helm. And at the end of the day, there's strategies and culture that the organizations take. Businesses want investors, shareholders, and profit. Hockey team wants profit and Stanley Cups. Same goals. One's privately owned, one's publicly owned. Some are publicly owned. We won't get into that. The general manager's job at the end of the day is to pick the best players and put the best hockey team on the ice. Then he's got a whole bunch of other jobs. Hockey organizations run just like businesses. President and general manager, Mr. Bobby Clarke. General manager's under it, second most important person responsible for bringing in personnel. And then you end up having scouts and affiliate general managers or assistant general managers for other reasons. Scouting is a very difficult job, and we're going to get into scouting and how all this Hextall Clarke thing worked out. But let's go ahead and throw the quote on the screen. There's two quotes here I want to look at. First, Bobby Clarke is saying that every scout in the room wanted to go with Cale Makar in 2017, not Nolan Patrick. They said Hextall ended up making a unilateral decision. He didn't listen to anyone in the room. He went with Nolan Patrick. We all know how that worked out. Makar was the pick in that draft. Number two, he said that from day one, when Hextall was in the building, he alienated himself from everybody. He locked himself in the office, didn't listen to anybody, said, I'm the boss and it's my way or the highway. Is anybody surprised that a guy that does this? Oh, Ronnie, and has a temper tantrum and a known history of snapping on the ice, being an absolute crazy person, swinging his stick, looking for justice, is a one-man show who doesn't want any help from anybody and he isn't a team guy. No! What makes people think, like Bobby Clarke or any other president, that just because you played a lot of hockey means you're going to be good in this role? That's not the way leadership works. It's a totally different skill set. Playing in the NHL gives you an advantage when working in hockey because you see the inner workings of teams. And when it comes down to it, it's all about the inner working in players. But if you're missing the leadership component, the education, the background, the knowledge to make this work, you're going to be trash. And at the end of the day, for every Joe Sakic and Steve Yzerman that are just brilliant player general managers, there's 30 or 40 guys that gave a roll at it and they suck. They're absolute busts. They were great hockey players. They're trash at doing the job. And hockey is a very incestuous, closed sport. They're really not that open to hiring guys that haven't played in the NHL who are going to be successful. And the few guys that end up getting there, they're oddities that end up making it through. So now that we've picked apart Ronnie and Bobby a bit, going, look, I've met Bobby a couple times at golf tournaments. Now, Bob is awesome. He's fantastic. He doesn't know who the heck I am, but I've gotten to sit with him, hear stories with him, chat with him, little autograph. Bob Clarke is just an absolute beauty of an individual. But you're the leader of the ship, man. And you look at behavior like this, there's a reason he was fired. But when it comes to culture, we've all heard the term, the culture comes from the bottom up. Well, guess what? The top down sets the ability for the bottom up to bring that culture. The culture's coming from the soil. The top needs to water it. And the leaders of the business, the president, has to create a culture in the organization that is safe enough for those people all around to voice their opinions and ideas. Now, here's a video above about all the NHL leagues and where players come from if you want to know a little bit more about how damn hard it is to find players. But there's no less than 45 leagues out there that feed the NHL. We all know the big ones, the CHL, the USHL, the NCAA, and the AHL, but there's a ton more below that all around the world where you got to find the best players. There's tier 1 and tier 2 leagues and tier 3 leagues, and they're all basically ranked and vying every year in a private market to be the best league to feed talent to the NHL. In every one of those leagues and geographic areas, there's a scout that's assigned for it from the NHL. Some NHL scouts will do multiple leagues, some only do one league, but you have to find a way to get the most amount of players on paper ranked and sorted, and then it's the general manager's job to look through what all these scouts have done and say, this is the guy I'm going to pick. At the end of the day, though, there's two things that are going to happen in an organization. You're going to have groupthink, where everybody looks at the alpha dog or who the head scout is or the main scout is. That's usually the guy that works in the biggest league, gets the most amount of money, and has brought in the most amount of players. Look, spoiler alert, if I was the OHL scout for any other NHL team, I'd probably have the most hits on prospects too, because that league is the best league in the world at bringing in NHL players, bar none. Secondly is the WHL. Third is the QHL. They all change in order. The USHL is a great league, but if you're the scout in one of those four big leagues, you're going to be one of the bigger scouts at the table. Then there's a whole bunch of scouts of these secondary leagues that may actually have a better player than anybody else on the board, but they're not the top dog at the table, so they succeed in a guy like Makar coming from a second tier league like the Alberta Junior Hockey League ends up falling. Now, the Alberta Junior League is a fantastic league, but it's like league 15 to 10 when it comes to ranking NHL production leagues, because it develops athletes for the NCAA and other reasons. They're just not a primary NHL feeder league, but they still feed NHL players. That's how good NHL scouts are, is that they can literally go to any league in any rink-a-dink town and they can find you an NHL player when they see it. They're that damn good. The second thing that scouts can do is you can have too much groupthink, where everybody actually has a culture around the table of going, oh, I like that idea. Let me hear this plan. Let me hear that plan. We've all been in those business meetings before, or groups with friends. Let everybody speak. Let everybody have their moment. Now, what do we all think the best person is? It sounds like that is what this instance is saying, is that all the scouts in the room were saying Makar was the pick. That should have been a huge red flag for Ron Hextall. Ron Hextall's got to give his head a shake, because the scouts are individually chasing each other in terms of job category, trying to leapfrog each other for money, for position in the organization. That's just how organizations work. And when you get group consensus among a group of individuals that are fighting to be the top dog and have a lot of individual agendas, and trust me, scouts do just like politicians, and they all say this is the guy, then you should probably take that guy. They're telling you without a doubt, as much as I want my guy to be the guy, that's the guy. And that's what they do. They all have their guy from their league that they say, look, you guys may not have been there, but I was in the backwoods country of this little country bumpkin Canadian town or Russian town or Swedish town, and I saw this one guy out of nowhere and nobody else saw him, and I've been watching this for 30 years. That's the guy. The problem is every scout has been doing it for just as long. They're all very qualified people to make the opinion. So when they're all sitting there saying this is the guy, you probably should have taken him, Ronnie. But the other challenge with this is that general managers only get one crack at this. They're not going to fire the whole scouting staff. If they were wrong, then Hextall has a reason to say, no, look, I want to pick the center. So let's take out the fact that Ron Hextall is absolutely crazy and that the Philadelphia Flyers organization, as great as Flyers fans are and the Flyers team is, the organization as a whole has been an absolute mess because of the pressure to win Stanley Cups. It's just an interesting culture that's cultivated in Philadelphia. Let's take that out for a second and just talk about talent and players. Look, when you're drafting talent in the NHL, the easiest player to hit on is a winger. That's the easiest talent to convert from whatever league they're playing into the NHL, because it's the easiest job in the NHL. Sorry if you're a winger out there, but guess what? There's a reason wingers score a lot of goals and people go, oh man, got to build around Ovi and Kyle Connor. It's an easier role than center. It's not as coveted. It's hard to find. It's got a lower bust rate. The second easiest position to pick is center, and it's arguably the most important position to pick. Centers usually do convert to the NHL well, because even if you're a bad center, usually just move over to the wing and everything works out. It's the second easiest pick to make. Defensemen are the second hardest pick to make, and I switch over from using the term easiest to hardest because there's such a gap between wingers, centermen, defensemen, and goalies. So goalies are the hardest pick to make. Bust rate is high. Defensemen are the second hardest pick to make. Bust rate is still very high. Wingers are the easiest pick to make. Centers are the second easiest pick to make. You got me? Clear as mud, right? Language choice matters because defensemen are hard to pick. They're volatile. They take 3 to 5 years to develop. Career years for defensemen are 26 to 30. That is changing now, but tons of defensemen don't blossom until they have 4 or 5 years of NHL experience because it's so hard to play that position. It's so mentally draining, and it's like being the quarterback of a football team. You got to see everything. It takes a long time to develop these skills. Guy like Cale Makar is a 1 in a trillion player that ends up getting drafted. And for every pick you take in the top 3 for defensemen that are Cale Makar, you have 10 or 12 Zach Bogosians that end up in the top 5 that are fine-ish, but they're not worth a top 5 pick considering Bogosian went in a draft where guys like Pietrangelo, PK Subban, Shea Weber, Roman Josi, they're all below him. They missed on these guys. Some of the best defensemen in the NHL are in the late first round, second round, some in the early third round, because people aren't willing to take a chance on them in the top 5. That's just truth. It is a very risky pick to risk a top 5 pick on a defenseman at any time. Hey, you remember Eric Johnson? He was a top pick. Shouldn't have been a top pick. Aaron Ekblad took a lot of time to develop, even though he was a first overall pick. Rasmus Dahlin, great pick, going to take time to develop. Owen Power, probably the same thing. Very rarely do guys step in and just become sheer dominant forces, but Makar ends up being that guy. He's the best guy in that draft. There's no question. So the two teams in front of him, they end up picking the centerman. He sure ends up getting picked because I want to talk about Nolan Patrick for a minute here because of Nolan Patrick's injury history. Here's a brief walk down memory lane of Nolan Patrick. I'm from Winnipeg. Nolan's from Winnipeg. I've watched Nolan play since he was 12. Nolan Patrick was the best player in that draft until he got chewed up and spit out and injured in the WHL meat grinder. Look, the W, the O, and the Q are the best junior leagues at developing players because they play 70 games a year, maybe more. You're on buses. It's a pro-style system with pro-style coaches. It's great. Playing games makes you better at the game, but playing more games at the level that they play at in the W, the O, and the Q with the violence and the level that they play at can take your career out before it even started. And he had a concussion and a shoulder injury before his career even got off the ground. That's disappointing. So what are you going to do? Are you going to pass on one of the best players in the draft because maybe he'll get hurt? That sounds easy with hindsight, but tons of players rebound from injuries like that only to be dominant. Crosby missed 3 of the best years of his career. He's still dominant today. Nobody gave up on him. Other players, they're out for life. They never come back. They hit their head and it's over. Same with shoulders, same with knees. It's all the same thing. We all remember the success stories. Very few of us remember the failures. So it is really difficult when you're looking down the barrel of a franchise center that fell to you, because Nico Heischer's fine, but he's just a second line center and you're going, crap, this guy could be a generational center. I should take him. It was a safe pick at the time other than injury history, considering the risk that goes into drafting a defenseman. Hindsight, folks. Put yourself back into the time. Very difficult not to pick Makar unless all the scouts around you are telling you to pick Makar. When the smart people in the room tell you to do something and you're the only one opposing them, you're probably incorrect. So I'll leave you guys with that. Hopefully that gives you some insight into that draft, into Nolan Patrick, into Cale Makar, into what it means to be an NHL GM scout and how much pressure is under these guys. Remember, like, subscribe, and join us. You're going to find gems like this and hockey knowledge that you won't find on any other channel, any other article here on Hot Garbage Sports.